During a penultimate scene of my memoir, when they tell you to be good, I flee an imaginary conversation with my father and reminisce on the death of a friend, then being betrayed by another. In my book, I react to this betrayal by attacking my former friend, while wishing in my mind to be an army of destruction. Army of destruction. What does that mean? How can the ways we learn to love, survive, and protect ourselves lead us closer to or further away from destruction? And when is it useful to destroy other things, other people, or even our past selves? So this year it will be 15 years since I first came out. I'm 30 years old and I first came out when I was 15. And I wanted to make this video both as a reflection and as a signal or a offering to my younger self or people that might be like my younger self online. The night that was one of the scariest nights in my life, and it was the night that I came out. I remember in high school, things were really difficult in my family because I had a stepfather who was incarcerated, and you're going through teenage angst, and I was working through the aftermath of my own self-hatred because of Black culture and Caribbean culture and all these messages you get about what it means to be a man or a boy growing up. And one night, my mother woke me up. She'd gone through my journal and had read it and had found out that I'd written in there that I was gay. And that began the next year and a half of these at-home struggles with coming out. The night that she found out, I remember we woke up really early and we talked intensely in the basement, and it was really fucked up, and my mother said a lot of fucked up things, and the next day I had to go to school. And ironically, it was this huge field trip to Cedar Point, an amusement park of all places. And in the back of my head I was thinking, I don't know what's going to happen when I get home. I don't know if I'm going to be safe. I don't know if this is like the end of my life as I know it. I don't know what's going to happen. And I got picked up from school. I remember my mother drove me to this dark parking lot, and I was thinking, oh my fucking God, what's about to go down? And we ended up talking to my aunt. Things didn't get much better from there. I feel lucky that I graduated high school at 17, that I was able to go to college, that I was able to go to college without much financial help from my parents, meaning like I didn't have a lot of enmeshment because of financials. The next number of years were scary and messed up. I mean, I had so many conversations with my mother where she would say the most messed up things about being gay, and I just had to take it. I remember coming back home from school for like winter breaks and being really upset and having to prepare myself and my body for the things that I'd hear. There's so many things that complicate my coming out journey. One of them is the fact that when I was really young, like 7 months old, my biological father was killed, and his relationship with my mother had its good and bad parts, but there were very toxic things about their relationship. And I think at a very early age, I learned that anger is bad. That anger is bad. Even if I think back to my first movie that I ever really loved, Titanic. And that's a movie about a girl entrapped in an abusive relationship because of her family, who finds love through this caring, artistic, soft man. In some ways, I kind of look at it as some of the first lessons in anger that I ever got, that anger is this destructive force. Anger is something that can traumatize other people, and it can lead them to all, like the victims of that rage, to also traumatize other people. I grew up with the trauma that my father had caused my mother being projected onto me. And so not only was I growing up in this family where queerness was stigmatized, but also where like this more traditional toxic and violent masculinity was sort of at the forefront or a shadow over us. And it definitely affected certain times growing up where I would try to stand up for myself, and that was seen as rage, or that was seen as a signifier that I would later be this toxic, fucked up man. So when I think about anger, it's the fact that my father's anger and rage shaped my childhood, my mother's rage and anger shaped certain parts of my childhood, and then also the world, the rage and anger that it puts towards Black bodies, towards queer bodies.
What's a faggot?
faggot is a word used to make gay people feel bad.
Am I a faggot?
No. No. You could be gay, but you gotta let nobody call you no faggot.
This is one of my most fucked up memories. I remember when I moved into college, this was about a year and a half after I'd come out, and I knew that my mother was worried about me for the right and wrong reasons. And her and my brother moved me in, and I remember she asked my brother to like go to the car so she could talk to me one on one before they were gonna leave officially. I was moving in early, so the campus was empty. I was basically one of the only ones on my college green, which is what they call like the different dorm neighborhood. And I remember my mother sat me down and she said, "Please don't be gay while you're in college." And then she left. And then she left, and then she left. And 17-year-old me was like, and I remember in that moment, I scanned everything that had happened to me. I saw my mother driving away, and this ball of rage and determination and indignation welled up in me. And I said to myself, I'm going to live. I'm going to live. I'm going to be as gay as I want, and I'm going to live, and I'm going to learn, and I'm going to do all the things that I want to do because I deserve that. It was almost like there was a voice in my head that allowed me to parent myself. And I developed that voice again and again and again throughout my life. But if I also look back, there were also certain ways that it held me back, certain things that it told me that I think put me in a box in certain ways. I want to talk about that next. What it means to find a way to survive and what happens when that way of surviving doesn't serve you anymore. What do you do then? A number of years ago, I wrote an essay titled Who Loved Gay Black Boys Before Moonlight? And this essay covers a lot of ground. It talks about the significance and different themes in the 2016 film Moonlight, directed by Barry Jenkins. It talks about my relationship with my mother and my brother and my family, and the difficulty about wading through the aftermath of a violent coming out, and what does it mean when there isn't a quick healing. And it also delves into the significance of accurate and nuanced media representations of queer black men on screen. For those that haven't seen it, the film Moonlight is a masterclass, but it essentially is told in three parts and follows the same character, Chiron, from when he was is a child to a teenager to an adult. And in each of those sections, you see Chiron grappling with masculinity, with his community, with assimilation and acceptance, with his mother's addiction, with his relationship with the other men around him, and his burgeoning queerness. And I wrote this essay not too long after the movie came out, and the thesis of my essay is essentially I resonated with so much of the violence in this film because the violence seems somewhat familiar to me. The anger and rage of your peers who don't understand you and make fun of you and berate you. The anger of a parent who is working through their own things and sometimes projects that rage onto you, who doesn't know how to love you exactly in the way you want to be loved. This desire for a man who can be a paternal figure to help take care of you. And finally, as it bleeds into the second to third act, that is the part of the film that stirs me the most because in the whole kind of arc of the film, we get to see Bell Hooks's process of soul murder, which says that boys are trained into fitting a certain kind of mold, and in order to fit that mold, you have to chip away certain very real and existential and emotional parts of yourself in order to be the right kind of boy, in order to be the right kind of man.
What? You're funny, man. Why you say that? Just is, that's all. Why you always letting people pick on you, man? What you mean? You always letting them pick on you. So, what I gotta do? All you gotta do? Show these niggas you ain't soft.
This essay means a lot to me because I think it was one of the first times in my writing career where I had committed to talking about the messy aftermath of coming out. So much of literature or coming of age literature and related to queerness, it either never addresses that space or it speeds through the ugliness and the gray areas and the violence. And in this essay, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to ground the reader in the most fucked up parts of the film. And I also wanted to ground the reader in the moments in my life that have helped liberate me, like falling in love for the first time and writing my first book and stumbling upon these different communities and spaces that could take care of me. And in a Huffington Post piece where numerous members of the cast and crew were interviewed, Andre Holland, who is an actor who was in Selma and The Nick, and who plays the adult Kevin, who is the love interest of Chiron, says, for me, it comes back to the moment when Naomi's character, who plays Chiron's mom, says to Juan, who is Chiron's mentor when he is a kid, she says, you gonna tell him why kids pick on him all the time? You gonna tell him why? There's a certain part of Chiron that he can't hide. He can't hide who he is, whereas I think Kevin, for whatever reason, knows how to perform whatever he thinks masculinity is in a way that gives him a mask to the world. But Chiron doesn't have the luxury of a mask. As a result, he had to retreat into himself in order to survive, whereas Kevin is able to go outward in order to survive. But at the end of the day, they're just performing different versions of who they think the world wants them to be. This is the part of this film that I really resonate and struggle with. The shift from Act 2 to Act 3. At the end of Act 2, Chiron is basically once again bullied by the boys in his grade, including his love interest. And he snaps. He goes back to the school and he hits a guy with a chair. It ends up going to juvie and then eventually ends up gangbanging or drug dealing or whatever you want to call it. And even though I can say I went to college and I tried to be as gay as possible, I was still traumatized. I was still visiting home and navigating all of the emotional trauma and conflict. I was still trying to find ways to harden myself when I was around my family because no part of me ever really wanted to go no contact with my family. And it wasn't like everyone in my family had hurt me or harmed me intentionally, overtly. There was just mainly it was the closeness of the trauma that I dealt with in my own household after coming out. And I did learn to wear a mask. I did learn to harden myself. And I look back and I see it as totally necessary. I mean, when I went cross country when I was 20 to work a summer job, and I had a mishap with the bus on the last leg of the trip, and I remember calling my mother, and she was so disapproving of this summer job. And I called her and told her, hey, there's some mishap with the bus. I'm going to have to wait a while, but I'm safe. I'm good. And she accused me of being a sex worker. How those two things make connections, I don't know. But I think it was a fucked up comment about me being queer and traveling to some far off places where she didn't understand. And that translated to her saying that to me. And I remember I didn't talk to her for a few months. And by the time we started talking again, my best friend's mother passed away, and she was a big support system to me. And even going to the funeral, I remember just having to really get through it because I didn't know how to be vulnerable with my mother. It wasn't possible, and I was so angry. I was so angry. And this is the part of it all that is sometimes hard to admit. It's sometimes hard to think about, but the mask I was wearing around my family was both to protect myself and it was because I was so angry. How can they say these things and do these things and not remember? How can they say these things and do these things and claim that they love me? Don't I deserve to be loved just like they want to be loved? And this anger, I think, pushed me to organize, it pushed me to write, it pushed me to travel, it pushed me to go out into the world. And in a way, I wanted to prove all these fucked up things that I'd been told wrong about how I wouldn't be happy, about how my body would be ruined, about what kind of person queer people become. And I wanted to live a beautiful life where I traveled and I did things and I met people and I got my heart broken and I broke other people's hearts. And I look back and I did do all of those things. And it did give me an amazing life throughout my 20s. And I also felt like something would always be missing. I would have conversations with friends and they would say, "Oh, like your family will come around." And I really had to learn at a young age, like, you can't teach people how to love you. And you also can't wait for people to love you in the way that you need to be loved. You have to live your life. You have to move on. You have to figure out how to do things. And you have to move on even if it hurts. And the truth that required, the amount of self-reliance and also reliance on other people, community friends that required was a lot. And I think writing and activism and learning how to make media, it gave me a way to make my experience legible amidst all of the confusion and sadness and joy. And now I'll read you the end of the essay. With Moonlight, decades of struggle for a humanizing representation of gay black men in media's mainstream has finally culminated in a masterpiece whose importance reaches far beyond its Oscar win. Its success and the long, difficult history preceding its existence reveal an enduring and painful truth that black people have always been tasked with loving themselves before anyone else. For many, this lesson can only be freeing once it shows itself in the light. It's then it can fully be confronted. For me, it was during a recent trip to San Francisco to accept an award from GLAAD for my work in media and activism that this lesson became visible. On a street corner in the Castro at 2 a.m., my brother, once so comfortably estranged from me, told me he was proud of the person I'd become, despite our individual choices as gay black men. It was a work like Moonlight, a work which shows us with a deep and unaccustomed kind of humanity that finally made us capable of love. What I read in this is so interesting because years later, I'm kind of like, that is a conclusion, but the conclusion is that me and my brother still don't talk about it. And so, what do we do when we have to make peace, even though we haven't found a conclusion or reconciliation? What do we do when we know what we have to do to survive, but it might necessarily involve us confronting the people that have harmed us, that have ignored us, that didn't show up in the way that they could have? And this is the turn that I kind of learned to make in my life. What does it mean to acknowledge your anger and to find reconciliation and to begin to maybe see a new way forward?
Get you.
A lot of things have happened since I've come out. I mean, it's obviously been 15 years. I went to college, I graduated, I moved to different parts of the country, I have dated, I've gotten my heart broken, I've had friends die, I've had friends go to jail. I've done a lot of things. I wrote and published a book about my life and my upbringing and being queer. And I can only say that even with all of those changes and things that were huge milestones and hurdles, especially my book, I can confidently say the last 4 months of my life have helped me confront almost more in a way related to my queerness and my anger and my rage than anything else really. And it comes down to two different things, two different trips to Jamaica. A few years ago, I went to Jamaica for the first time in 10 years, and that was really difficult and trying. I saw my stepdad for the first time in 10 years, and that was my first time seeing him after I'd come out to him. I met my uncle and basically, like, actually tried to find my biological father's grave for the first time in my life, and it opened up a lot of things related to my childhood and my upbringing. And I remember on that trip kind of thinking back to Act 1 in Moonlight, where you see little Chiron. And when I watched that movie, I think, like, oh, this is a kid, and he also is a queer kid. Like, it doesn't need to be sexualized. And I remember going back to Jamaica and remembering how, and seeing how people remembered me from my childhood, I was thinking, like, I was always a queer kid. It was just that you grew up in a world that assumes that you're going to be straight or that you are straight. What happened in this most recent trip to Jamaica that I did, because I did go to Jamaica earlier this year in January 2025. In December of 2024, I had two grandparents pass away within the same week. And that kind of imploded my life in a way. Like, it forced me to kind of think about what vulnerability means in relation to me and my family. It forced me to confront the ways that I'd been angry and the ways that I knew I'd have to see a bunch of family again. And I had all these feelings. And I started sending intense text messages to different family members and really laying it all out there and being honest with my mom. And backstory is with me and my mom, we've gotten better since my first trip to Jamaica. We understand each other, we talk more. I think she I think she respects the resilience I've had to tap into as a queer person. And I think she also understands, like, you're traumatized. And I think can acknowledge that she had some hand in that. And I think what helped me kind of confront my rage is a few different things. Admitting my anger to family members that I felt like could have been there for me, like my brother or my father. And when I went to Jamaica, I ended up having a long conversation with my father and my mother and talking through a lot of things and addressing a lot of the things that we haven't talked about. And in some ways, I look at that conversation and I'm like, couldn't we have had this like 10 years ago? Like, why did I have to be the one to fucking crash out and have my grandparents die and now we're here? But also, it's like, isn't that just the way life goes sometimes? Like, you need to get to a point where what you have been doing doesn't serve you anymore, and maybe something else needs to happen. And I think that's what my grandparents' death kind of forced me to realize, because I was just like, I don't have most of my grandparents anymore. I'm going to have to choose when or how I'm engaging with my family even more. And if I'm going to do that, I'm going to need to lay it all out on the line. Like, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm disappointed. I felt bitter. And it was the first time in such a long time where I felt justified in being that direct with my rage in this area of my life. And I ended up going to Jamaica, ended up having a long conversation with my mom and dad. I ended up forgiving them. They ended up apologizing. They ended up acknowledging things that they'd done wrong. It's why I love the last act of Moonlight so much, that scene where Chiron is talking to his mother.
You come all the way the hell to Georgia to have you falling into the same shit, Chiron. No. You gonna listen.
Go. To who, Ma? Huh? To you? Really, though?
Please. Please. I messed up. I mean, I fucked it all the way up. I know that. But your heart ain't gotta be black like mine, baby. I love you, Chiron. I do. I love you, baby. I mean, you ain't gotta love me. Lord knows I did not have love for you when you needed it. I know that. So you ain't gotta love me. But you gonna know that I love you. You hear? You hear me, Chiron?
I hear you, Mama.
But what she's basically trying to give to him is the gift of, you were right to deal with things in the way that you did. I think is what the mother is saying. You were right. What isn't right is the fact that you close yourself off from the world. It's such a beautiful twist. It's such a beautiful turn. And it's years later. It's probably when Chiron is no longer a teenager. He's in his 30s. He's lost his mentor. He's performing a certain kind of masculinity for other people. And in his mother giving him the permission to begin to heal, to begin to acknowledge his pain, his rage, his suffering. From there, Chiron visits his old lover again. The loss that happens when we have to change ourselves, or we feel like we have to change ourselves to survive. And for me, it was a much less drastic, overt, outward change. But it looked like in a lot of my 20s feeling alone, of having to parentify myself, of feeling my body and the weight of it change when I would go home, of not being able to laugh as easily around my family, and how I don't feel that way anymore. And it's interesting to look back and see these pieces of media were giving me these different messages that I did hold on to. And with Moonlight, I think the message was do what you have to do to survive. It's okay. But don't erase the part of you that really wants to live, that has that spark, that is curious, that maybe was picked on before, but it's actually probably some of the most beautiful parts of you. And that is not something to hide. It is something to consider when you're in an unsafe environment for sure. But once you become an adult and you have more tools at your disposal, or you can look back and reflect a little bit differently, you can find the way to give yourself the autonomy to be yourself again, or to learn how to be this new version of you. It's to say that things can change, and they can change in ways that you or I might not imagine for ourselves, but things can change. My anger, my suffering deserves to be acknowledged, and it doesn't have to be a destruction upon other people like I've been made to believe. And there are ways that I fought against that growing up, but now I think I really understand that. Like, if you don't acknowledge your anger and your bitterness, but what do you do when you aren't just surviving anymore and you're living your life and those antagonistic forces aren't at play in the same way? How do you let go? How do you move on? You begin to confront and acknowledge the things that you thought you weren't capable of confronting or acknowledging before. Knowing and seeing when anger is an act of love. And I don't mean anger as in like brutality or harm or control. I mean anger in terms of acknowledgement of truth, of being committed enough to your own reality that you have the bravery to share it and acknowledge it with other people, even if that means acknowledging your anger, even if that means acknowledging your disappointment, your bitterness, and how to do this in your own way, to do it in a healthy way, is way more liberating than holding it in and just learning to survive. It's way more liberating. And even in just the past few months, I felt lighter. I felt like I can look at this year and the next years and orient myself differently. It's almost weird to say, but it almost feels like an adjustment period. Like I've related to my family or certain parts of my life in this way, and now I can maybe feel safe. Like it just doesn't fully compute, even though I know it's more possible now than ever. And I wanted to end this video on saying for any folks out there that are working through your own difficulties or sadness or rage or bitterness, you deserve to feel how you feel. You deserve to be upset. And you also deserve to figure out, how do I work through this in a way that doesn't hold me back? How do I work through this in a way that is healthy? How do I work through this in a way that allows me to acknowledge what I've been through and not hide it, not brush it under the rug, especially to the people that it matters most to outside of myself? And so I hope this video helps any folks out there that are reflecting on anger, on masculinity, or who love the film Moonlight. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I've been thinking about this essay, and I'm going to link that essay that I wrote, Who Loved Gay Black Boys Before Moonlight, in the description so folks can read. Thank you for watching another one of my videos. Like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notify button. Consider supporting me on Patreon. And consume beautiful queer black media. That's your homework.